You've seen it thousands of times. Every email address, every Twitter handle, every Instagram tag, the @ this little swirl sitting there, connecting names to places, people to platforms. But where did it come from? And why does this specific symbol get to be the face of the internet age? Welcome back to PandaProgramming. Starting with this video, I want to go all over your keyboard and explain the origins of the different symbols on it. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Most people think @ was invented for email. Ray Tomlinson picked it in 1971 when he sent the first networked email message, choosing it to separate the username from the host computer. Makes sense, right? The symbol literally means user @ computer, perfect for the digital age. But here's the thing, why was @ on his keyboard in the first place? The earliest known @ symbol shows up in a pretty unexpected place. In 1345, a Bulgarian monk was copying a Greek chronicle written by Constantinos Manasses. This wasn't just any document, it was commissioned by Tsar Ivan Alexander himself, richly illustrated with miniatures depicting biblical scenes and Bulgarian history. The manuscript sits in the Vatican Apostolic Library today, and right there, at the end of the text, the monk wrote the word Amen with a stylized @ in place of the capital letter A. Why? Nobody knows for sure. Medieval scribes often created ligatures, fancy combinations of letters, to save time or add decoration. Maybe the @ was just the monk's artistic flourish. Maybe it had some symbolic meaning we've lost to history. The monk didn't leave us an explanation, but what this tells us is huge. The @ symbol existed in the medieval world, centuries before computers, centuries before typewriters, centuries before anyone was thinking about electronic anything. Speaking about huge matters about centuries before, you should have subscribed to this channel long before, and if you haven't still, do it, as you shouldn't miss what's coming next. Fast forward about 200 years, May 4th, 1536. Francesco Lappi, a merchant from Florence, is writing a letter from Seville to Rome. He's discussing ships that just arrived from the Americas loaded with treasure, and he mentions wine prices. And right there in his letter, he uses @ to represent a unit of measure. Specifically an amphora, one of those big ceramic jars the Greeks and Romans used for storing wine and oil. The Italians abbreviated amphora with @. One @ of wine, Lappi wrote, was worth 70 or 80 ducats. In Spain and Portugal, merchants had been using something similar even earlier. There's a Spanish document from 1448 that shows @ being used to denote wheat shipments. They called their unit an arroba, borrowed from Arabic arab, meaning the quarter, because it was roughly a quarter of a larger measure called a quintal. One arroba was about 25 pounds. So throughout the 1500s and 1600s, @ started showing up on invoices and receipts all across Europe. Merchants loved it. Quick to write, easy to spot, and gradually its meaning evolved from a specific weight to something more general, price per unit. Like 10 barrels of wine at 5 ducats means 5 ducats each. The @ functioned like multiplication and division rolled into one handy mark. This commercial use spread from Italy to Spain to France to England. By the 1600s, @ had become what we still call it in English today, the commercial @. Now here's where things get interesting. For most of human history, everything was handwritten. Then Gutenberg's printing press came along in the 1450s, and text had to be standardized, cast in physical type. But for daily correspondence, people still wrote by hand. That is, until typewriters showed up in the late 1800s. The first commercially successful typewriter was the Scholes and Glidden model, sold by Remington starting in 1874. Christopher Latham Scholes had invented the QWERTY keyboard layout we still use today, and @ made the cut. Commercial typewriter manufacturers knew their customers needed it. By the late 1880s and 1890s, @ was showing up on keyboards. It appeared on at least one 1889 model and was definitely standard on the massively successful Underwood No. 5 starting in 1900. @ wasn't front and center on these keyboards, usually sitting at the edge alongside other commercial symbols like the cent sign, but it was there, physically encoded in metal type bars. As typewriters spread into offices, businesses, newsrooms, and eventually homes, @ came along for the ride. When early computers started developing in the 1940s and 1950s, they needed input devices. They used teletypes, basically electric typewriters that could send and receive signals. And since teletypes were based on typewriter keyboards, @ was right there on them. As computer character encoding systems evolved through the 1950s and early 1960s, @ made its way into those systems. Different manufacturers had their own encoding schemes. IBM had several versions of BCD codes for representing characters, and these expanded over time to include commercial symbols. Then, in 1963, something crucial happened. The American Standards Association published ASCII, the American Standard Code for Information Interchange. This was meant to be universal. Every computer manufacturer could use the same code, and @ got position 64 in ASCII. From that moment on, @ was guaranteed to be on virtually every computer keyboard ever made. Not because of email, that wouldn't exist for another 8 years, but because @ was already part of business and computing infrastructure. So when Ray Tomlinson sat down in 1971 at Bolt, Beranek and Newman working on ARPANET, he had a problem to solve. He'd been working on a program called SNDMSG that let people leave messages for each other on the same computer. But he wanted to send messages between different computers on the network. He needed a way to address these messages. The solution needed two parts, the person's name and the computer's name, and something to separate them. Whatever symbol he picked couldn't already be used in programming, or it would confuse the computers. Tomlinson looked at his keyboard. He needed something that wasn't going to show up in anyone's name, wasn't being used in file paths, and there it was, @. He picked it because it was perfect for the job. The symbol literally meant @ in commercial use, user at computer. It made intuitive sense. So he set up his addressing system, username at hostname, and sent himself a test message between two computers sitting in his room. The first networked email. Tomlinson himself said he couldn't remember what that first message said. Something like QWERTYUIOP, just testing the keys. But the content didn't matter. The system worked. It wasn't dramatic. The popular story that @ was this forgotten symbol that email rescued, not accurate. @ was already part of ASCII, already on keyboards, already integrated into computing. Tomlinson just gave it a new job, and it turned out to be the job that would make it famous. Think about the path @ has traveled. A medieval Bulgarian monk in 1345, decorating a sacred text. Italian and Spanish merchants in the 1500s, tracking wine shipments. Typewriter manufacturers in the 1880s, encoding commercial life. IBM engineers expanding character sets. And finally, Ray Tomlinson in 1971, creating the email address format. Each generation found a use for @. Each generation passed it forward. The symbol wasn't designed for any single purpose. It evolved, adapted, found new meanings. And Tomlinson's use stuck. His addressing system became the standard for every email address ever created, billions of them. The @ symbol went from marking wine prices to marking digital identities. By the 1990s, as email exploded and the web took off, @ became one of the most recognized symbols on the planet. Different languages have wildly different names for it. In Italian, chiocciola, snail. In Swedish, snabel, elephant's trunk. In German, Flammeaffe, Spider